In February 1977, the USDA mailed a repair bulletin. Every farmer in Redwood County received one. Most of them skimmed the first page, then they put it in a drawer. The bulletin was not classified. It was not difficult to find. It had been printed by the Agricultural Research Service, mailed to county extension offices across the upper Midwest, and distributed to every farm operation on the mailing list. 47 farms in Redwood County were on that list. The document was 8 pages. It had charts. It had cost tables. It was written in plain language by engineers who had spent 2 years studying a specific problem that was about to become very expensive for a lot of people. The problem was this: combine harvesters bought in the late 1960s were aging. The major manufacturers, International Harvester, John Deere, Gleaner, had sold large volumes of machines between 1966 and 1971, financed on terms that had seemed manageable when grain prices were climbing. By 1977, those machines were 9 and 10 years old. Bearings were wearing, cylinder concaves were cracking, feeder house chains were stretching beyond tolerance. The equipment was not failing catastrophically. It was degrading quietly, the way machines do when they are used hard and serviced minimally. The Bulletin made a specific argument. Repairing an older combine, a full mechanical rebuild, done properly, typically cost between 40 and 60% less than purchasing a replacement. Replacement costs had risen sharply since 1972 due to inflation and materials costs. A new combine in 1977 was running between $28,000 and $34,000 depending on configuration. A thorough rebuild of a machine that was otherwise sound could be done for $4,000 to $8,000 in parts and labor, sometimes less if the owner had the mechanical knowledge to do portions of the work himself. The Bulletin also noted something that the sales floors at implement dealerships did not emphasize. A rebuilt machine, properly done, would perform at or near original factory specification for another 8 to 12 years. The steel in a 1968 combine was the same steel. The engineering was sound. What wore out were components, not the machine itself. This information was not hidden. It was not proprietary. It was in a government document mailed to 47 farms. 46 of them put it in a drawer. I've read that bulletin. What strikes me, reading it now, is how plainly it was written. No jargon. The cost tables are straightforward. The argument is direct. A person who read it carefully for 40 minutes would have understood exactly what it was saying. Most people read the first page, saw that it was about equipment maintenance, and decided it was for someone else. That decision was not unreasonable. February is not the month a farmer in southern Minnesota is thinking about combine mechanics. February is the month you are finishing seed orders, reviewing fertilizer contracts, talking to your banker about the operating line for the coming year. The combine is in the shed. Harvest is 7 months away. A document about repair costs, arriving in the middle of planting season, competes for attention with a dozen more immediate problems. There is also a quieter reason most people did not act on the bulletin, one that the document itself could not address. Rebuilding a combine is not a financial decision in the way that signing a loan is a financial decision. It is a physical commitment. It requires shop space, tools, time in February and March that has other claims on it, and a specific kind of mechanical confidence that is not evenly distributed across 47 farms. The bulletin could tell you what a rebuild would cost. It could not tell you whether you were the person who could do it. Most farmers in Redwood County in 1977 knew, approximately, where they sat on that question. Some of them were mechanics first and farmers second. Most of them were farmers who fixed what they had to fix and called for help on the rest. The bulletin was most useful to the first group. Most of the 47 were in the second. Nels Brogren had farmed 480 acres of corn and soybeans in the western part of Redwood County since 1961. He had bought his combine in 1968. An International Harvester 915, one of the larger machines available that year, purchased used from a retiring farmer 2 counties over for $11,200. He had put 1,400 hours on it since then. The machine had been reliable. He knew its sounds, its habits, the way it behaved in tough corn, and the way it handled light beans. I only understood later what that kind of knowledge actually means. Not the mechanical knowledge specifically, but the particular confidence that comes from having been inside a thing and found it comprehensible. It changes what you read. It changes what you're willing to believe is possible. He was 53 years old in 1977. He had grown up on the farm his father had homesteaded. He had never attended college. He had learned machinery the way most farmers of his generation learned it. By necessity, by failure, by the specific knowledge that accumulates when you cannot afford to call someone else every time something breaks. In 1971, he had dropped the feeder house on the 915 to replace a worn drive sprocket. He had done it alone, in his own shop, over a long November weekend. He had rebuilt the elevator chain that same winter. He knew what the inside of the machine looked like. He knew where it was wearing. When the USDA Bulletin arrived in February 1977, Nels Brogren read all 8 pages. He did not read it because he was more diligent than his neighbors. He read it because the title mentioned combine repair costs, and he had been thinking about that specific question for the better part of a year. His 915 was developing a cylinder-bearing knock that he had been monitoring since the previous harvest. It was not critical yet. It would be, within a season or two. He had already been considering his options before the envelope arrived. He had priced a new combine at the International Harvester dealer in Redwood Falls the previous November. The salesman had been friendly, and the machine on the floor was impressive. Cab, air conditioning, a grain loss monitor that the older machines did not have. The financing package was available. The monthly payment was $624 over 60 months. Nels had driven home and written the number on a piece of paper and set it on his desk and looked at it for 3 days. $624 a month was $7,488 a year. His $915 in a normal year required about $600 in parts. The new machine would cost him $6,888 more per year to own before it turned a wheel. He would need to harvest additional acres, or see significantly better yields, or catch a sustained improvement in commodity prices to justify that difference. None of those things were certain. The bearing knock was certain. What he found in the bulletin confirmed something he had suspected but had not yet quantified. The replacement math did not work. Not at 1977 prices. Not with the interest rates that machinery loans were carrying. The bulletin cited current dealer financing at 11 to 13% on equipment loans. A $30,000 combine financed over 5 years at 12% carried a monthly payment of around $667. Annual debt service of roughly $8,000 before fuel, before insurance, before any repairs the new machine might need. His 915, rebuilt properly, would cost him a fraction of that. He had the shop. He had the tools. He had, more importantly, the specific knowledge of that machine's internals that made the labor estimate realistic rather than theoretical. He did not read the bulletin as theory. He read it as confirmation of arithmetic he had already started doing. That is the activation gap the bulletin crossed for Nels Brogren that it did not cross for his neighbors. His neighbors read a document about repair costs. He read a document that matched a question he had already been holding for 11 months. The question was not whether to repair or replace. He had been building toward that answer since the bearing knock appeared in October 1976. The question was whether his instinct about the math was right. The bulletin said it was. Been there more times than I can count. Numbers on paper say fix it, sure. But what really makes up your mind is knowing that machine. You've been in there before, you know what's what. The table just puts a number to what you already knew the second you heard that knock. By March, he had sourced the cylinder-bearing assemblies from an independent parts supplier in St. Cloud, not the dealer who wanted $340 per assembly, but a supplier who stocked IH replacement components at $190 each. He needed two. He ordered three, keeping one as a spare. He pulled the cylinder that month, working evenings after the ground was still frozen and field work hadn't started. His neighbor's son, a 20-year-old who had been helping on the farm part-time, worked alongside him for the more difficult lifts. The concave bars he replaced himself. The feeder house chain he had anticipated. He ordered it when he ordered the bearings, having measured the stretch the previous fall and knowing it was outside tolerance. The drive belts he inspected and replaced two that showed cracking at the edges. Total parts cost $2,380. His own labor he did not price. It was winter. The alternative use of that time was limited. He was done by the first week of April. The machine ran in his yard for 3 hours before fieldwork started. The bearing knock was gone. The feeder house ran smooth and even. He timed the cylinder and checked the concave clearance against factory specification. It was within tolerance on every point. Spring 1977 was a late planting season across southern Minnesota. A wet April pushed fieldwork back 2 weeks across most of the county. Farmers who had financed new equipment were making loan payments through April and May, regardless of whether the machines were running. Nels Brogren was not making a loan payment. He had spent $2,380 and several evenings in a warm shop. I remember being told about the spring of 1977 by someone who had farmed Redwood County through that period. He described the implement dealer's lot in Morgan as unusually quiet that spring. Normally there was traffic. Farmers stopping in for parts, for conversations, for the particular social ritual of looking at new equipment without committing to buy. That spring the lot was quieter. The new machines sat on the line. The financing was available. The payments were the thing that wasn't moving. Harvest 1977 came in mid-September. Nels Brogren's corn ran 104 bushels per acre on his better ground, 91 on the lighter soil along the creek bottoms. His soybeans came in at 33 bushels, which was good for a dry August in Redwood County. The 915 ran through harvest without a significant breakdown. One bearing on the grain elevator head, not one of the ones he had replaced, showed heat after a long day in tough corn. He caught it, greased it, monitored it through the rest of the season. It held. When harvest was finished, he pulled that elevator bearing and inspected it. It was worn but not failed. He replaced it anyway in October, before the machine went into the shed. The cost was $47. He noted it in the maintenance log he kept in a spiral notebook on the shop shelf. Date, part, cost, hours at replacement. He had been keeping that log since 1969. It told him at a glance what the machine had cost him in any given year and what it was likely to cost him in the year ahead. The log was, in its way, a private version of the USDA Bulletin. The same argument built from his own machine's history rather than a national sample. The Bulletin had found him because he had already been building toward its conclusion on his own. By 1979, commodity prices had softened from the peaks of the mid-70s. Input costs had not softened with them. Machinery loan balances that had seemed manageable in 1976 and 1977 were less manageable against tighter margins. Interest rates were beginning to move in a direction that would not reverse for several years. Farmers who had financed new combines in 1976 and 1977 were 2 and 3 years into 5-year notes. They had made their decisions reasonably: new equipment, manufacturer warranty, current technology. The logic had been sound at the time the papers were signed. By 1983, the prime rate had been above 15%. Machinery loans from 1976 carried their original fixed terms, but operating lines and land debt were adjusting with the market. A farmer carrying an $18,000 machinery loan balance alongside a tightening operating line was not in the same position as a farmer whose only equipment cost that year was a fuel bill and a set of belts. The machinery loan was not the thing that failed most farms in Redwood County through 1983 and 1984. Land debt was heavier, operating lines more critical. But debt stacks. Each obligation that could have been avoided was one fewer degree of freedom when conditions tighten. Farmers who had been methodical about avoiding equipment debt in the late 70s found themselves with options in the early 80s that their neighbors did not have. Not because they had predicted what was coming, but because they had made separate decisions, for separate reasons, that happened to leave them lighter when the weight arrived. People call it vision. It wasn't vision. It was a man who didn't want a $624 payment on something he didn't need yet. Plain and simple. The fact that it worked out in 83 don't mean he saw that coming in 77. Don't let a good outcome make the story something it wasn't. Nels Brogren's 915 was 16 years old in 1983. He had put another 900 hours on it since the 1977 rebuild. He had replaced the concave bars again in 1981. He had rebuilt the elevator chain a second time. Total maintenance expenditure since 1977, approximately $4,100 over 6 years. His combine cost him, in an average year, less than $700 in parts. He had no machinery loan. He did not attribute this to the USDA Bulletin. He attributed it to arithmetic. The Bulletin had confirmed the arithmetic. The arithmetic had always been there. The maintenance log had been there too. 8 years of entries in a spiral notebook, each one a small piece of evidence about what the machine was and what it would cost to keep it running. When the Bulletin arrived with its national cost tables and its engineering analysis, it landed on top of 8 years of local data that pointed in the same direction. The two documents, one from Washington and one from his own shop shelf, told the same story. That convergence is what made the decision feel obvious to him when it was not obvious to anyone else. That is the part of the story worth sitting with. 47 farmers received the same document. 46 of them decided, reasonably, that it was background reading. One of them read it as an answer to a question he had already been carrying. The information wasn't different. The question was different. I've thought about that distinction a lot. The question you're already carrying is the filter. Everything else, bulletins, articles, conversations at the co-op, passes through that filter. Most of it doesn't catch. Every so often, something does. Not because it's better information, because it's the right information for the question you happen to be holding. His neighbors were not careless people. They were not uninformed. Most of them had the same general awareness that repairing equipment could be cost-effective under the right circumstances. What they did not have, in February 1977, was a specific machine with a specific bearing knock that they had been thinking about for 11 months. They did not have the internal knowledge of that machine's components that made the Bulletin's cost tables land as confirmation rather than abstraction. Nels Brogren read a government document and acted on it. His neighbors read the same document and filed it. The difference was not the document. The difference was that one farmer had already seen it work once, had already opened the machine, had already learned what was inside, had already done the arithmetic on a smaller repair and found it accurate. The Bulletin arrived into a mind that had already been prepared to receive it. That is what activation looks like from the outside. One person moves. Everyone else had the same information. From a distance, it looks like foresight, or luck, or some quality the others lacked. From the inside, it looks like a bearing knock in October and a question that sat with you through a long winter until an envelope arrived in February that told you your math was right. Everybody's got access to the same information. That ain't the problem. The problem is you don't really hear something till you're already living the question. That Bulletin don't mean nothing till you got a bearing knock keeping you up at night. That's when it lands. That's when it matters. The information wasn't hidden. The difference was that one farmer had already seen it work once.